In the late 1790s, the young United States found itself on the brink of war with one of the world's most powerful nations, France. Ships were seized on the high seas, diplomats insulted, and public outrage boiled across the new nation. Americans demanded action. Cries for war grew louder, and the fate of the Republic seemed uncertain. Yet, amid this chaos, President John Adams took a path few expected. Instead of rushing into battle, he chose a strategy that required patience, courage, and an almost unimaginable level of restraint. The stakes could not have been higher. A full-scale war with France would have drained the nation's limited resources, divided the fragile political system, and threatened the very survival of the fledgling republic. Every decision Adams made was scrutinized by a divided Congress, partisan newspapers, and a restless public. Even his closest advisors questioned his cautious approach, urging him toward military action that could have escalated into catastrophe. But Adams had a vision. He believed that the strength of a nation was not measured solely in cannons or soldiers, but in the wisdom to choose peace over pride when it mattered most. What he achieved in those critical years would not only prevent war with France, but also set a lasting precedent for American diplomacy. This is the story of how John Adams avoided war with France against overwhelming pressure and preserved the future of the United States. In the closing years of the 18th century, the United States faced one of its first great tests as a young nation. The country was new, still finding its identity, and still working to establish its place among older and more powerful nations. Europe was once again in a state of upheaval. The French Revolution had shaken the old political order, and the wars that followed drew in almost every major power on the continent. Britain and France were locked in a long and bitter fight for dominance. Their struggle reached across the Atlantic and pulled the United States into a situation it was not ready to handle. When John Adams became president in 1797, he inherited a foreign crisis that could easily have ended in open conflict. Relations between the United States and France had deteriorated at an alarming pace. A few years earlier, France had been one of America's strongest allies. France had supported the American Revolution with money, ships, and soldiers at a time when the United States desperately needed help. The alliance formed during that war had seemed strong and lasting, but events in Europe changed the relationship faster than anyone expected. The French Revolution began with wide support in the United States. Many Americans believed the French people were following their example by trying to secure greater rights and end the power of kings. But as the revolution grew more violent, American opinion split. Federalists saw the uprising as proof that radical ideas could lead to chaos. Democratic Republicans continued to believe that the French were fighting for liberty. This division played a major role in American politics for years and influenced nearly every debate in the 1790s. Foreign policy was especially difficult during this period because the United States was still weak. The country had little money, a small army, and almost no navy. It depended heavily on trade with European nations, but those same nations were at war with each other. Britain and France both demanded American loyalty. Both tried to limit American trade with their enemy. Both seized ships they believed were helping the other side. The United States wanted to stay neutral, but neutrality was hard to maintain when both sides ignored American rights. One of the biggest sources of tension was Jay's Treaty in 1795. The United States signed the treaty with Britain to settle old disputes and improve trade relations. France saw the agreement as a betrayal. In their view, the United States had aligned itself with their greatest enemy. They believed the Americans were abandoning an alliance that had been formed during the Revolution. France responded by ordering its navy and privateers to seize American ships trading with Britain. This decision outraged American merchants and increased anti-French feelings across the country. By the time John Adams entered office, the United States had lost hundreds of ships to French captures. Merchants demanded protection. Politicians demanded a strong response. The press stirred public anger with stories of French insults and threats. The country was on edge, and many believed war was unavoidable. Adams understood the seriousness of the situation, but he also understood the consequences of war. The United States was not ready for a conflict against a major European power. The nation had limited resources. It had no large standing army and only a handful of warships. War would require higher taxes, greater debt, and years of preparation. It could also deepen political divisions at home. Adams approached the crisis with caution, experience, and a firm belief in diplomacy. He had spent years as a diplomat in Europe during the Revolution. He knew how European politics worked. He knew how fragile alliances could be. He also understood that national pride must sometimes give way to long-term security. Adams believed the United States needed to defend its rights, but he did not believe the country should rush into war. This did not mean Adams was unwilling to take action. He strengthened the Navy and prepared the country for possible conflict, but he kept his focus on negotiation. Even as pressure mounted, he looked for a way to reduce tensions without sacrificing American interests. He had to contend with a divided cabinet, a hostile Congress, and strong public anger. Yet he continued to search for a peaceful solution. The story of how John Adams avoided war with France is one of political courage and steady leadership. It is a story of choosing restraint at a moment when many demanded retaliation. It is a story of a president willing to risk his reputation to protect the nation's future. While other leaders pushed for war, Adams pursued peace. His decisions helped stabilize the country and preserve its independence at a critical moment. This crisis, often called the Quasi-War, offers important lessons about diplomacy, leadership, and the challenges faced by the young republic. Adams' actions helped keep the United States out of a conflict that might have weakened the country for decades. His choices shaped the future of American foreign policy and set an example for later presidents who faced similar challenges. During the American Revolution, France was a crucial ally. The Treaty of Alliance of 1778 linked the two nations in what many believed would be a long and loyal partnership. The French provided money, supplies, and military support at a time when the United States had little chance of survival on its own. Americans never forgot the role the French played at battles, such as Yorktown, where French ships and soldiers helped secure the victory that ended the war. For years after independence, the relationship stayed warm. American leaders regularly spoke about their debt to France. Many admired French culture and political ideas. But as the 1790s began, the friendship became strained. The French Revolution started with great enthusiasm, but soon turned violent. The execution of the king, the rise of new radical groups, and the turmoil in Paris shocked many Americans. Federalists, in particular, feared the revolution had gone too far. They worried that supporting France might encourage unrest at home. France, on the other hand, believed the United States remained a reliable partner. French officials expected the Americans to support them against Britain, just as France had supported the Americans years earlier. This expectation set the stage for conflict when the United States tried to remain neutral in European affairs. The French government watched American actions closely, and every decision was judged through the lens of alliance. When the United States refused to join France in fighting Britain, French leaders felt betrayed. They argued that the Treaty of Alliance obligated America to support France in any conflict with Britain. American leaders disagreed, claiming the treaty was defensive in nature and did not require them to join offensive wars. This disagreement grew as the two nations continued to argue about what the treaty truly meant. The French Revolution deeply influenced American politics, often in dramatic ways. The 1790s were filled with heated debates about the meaning of liberty, the risks of political extremes, and the proper role of government. The revolution in France served as a mirror for many of these American debates. Democratic Republicans saw the French Revolution as a natural extension of the American struggle for freedom. They viewed France as a partner in a global fight against monarchy and oppression. They believed the United States should support France when possible and resist any move toward closer ties with Britain. Leading figures like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison encouraged Americans to see the French people as fellow seekers of liberty. Federalists held a very different view. They saw the violence in France as a warning about what could happen when political passions ran unchecked. They believed that stability and order were more important than revolutionary ideals. To them, the French Revolution was proof that rapid change could lead to chaos. They preferred closer relations with Britain, which they believed had a stable government and reliable trade practices. Because of these differences, nearly every event involving France fueled political arguments in the United States. When France seized American ships, Democratic Republicans blamed Britain for provoking the crisis. When the United States passed laws to strengthen its navy, Federalists argued that France was a real enemy and needed to be confronted. By the time Adams entered office, this political divide had grown into a central feature of American life. Newspapers took sides. Public speeches grew angrier. Members of Congress clashed in ways that reflected not only policy differences, but deep disagreements about what the United States should become. France, as one of the symbolic pillars of these debates, ended up at the center of American political turmoil. Even though it was thousands of miles away, a major turning point came in 1795 with Jay's Treaty. The treaty was intended to settle lingering issues from the Revolutionary War between the United States and Britain. It addressed matters such as British forts still located on American soil, trade barriers, and compensation for seized ships. Federalists supported the treaty because it improved relations with Britain and reduced the risk of conflict. But France viewed the treaty with suspicion. The French government saw Jay's Treaty as a sign that the United States had chosen to side with Britain. French leaders believed the Americans had violated the spirit of the alliance. They also feared the treaty would give Britain an advantage in trade. In response, France began seizing American ships trading with Britain. These seizures increased rapidly. By early 1797, hundreds of American vessels had been captured. Merchants lost cargoes worth millions of dollars. The public reaction was sharp. Business owners demanded protection. Members of Congress argued over how to respond. Some wanted an embargo against France. Others demanded stronger defenses. The situation worsened when French diplomats refused to accept the new American minister, Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. This refusal was taken as an insult. It became clear that relations were no longer stable. France's actions pushed many Americans toward the Federalist viewpoint. People who had once admired the French Revolution began to see France as unpredictable and unfriendly. Still, many Democratic Republicans argued that the United States had provoked France by signing Jay's Treaty. They insisted that diplomacy could still mend the relationship if handled correctly. Thus, when Adams entered office, he walked into a storm. France viewed the United States as unfair and unreliable. The United States viewed France as aggressive and disrespectful. The stage was set for a major conflict. John Adams stepped into the presidency with decades of experience but few easy answers. He was aware of the fragile state of the country. The United States had no large navy, a weak army, and a limited budget. The government could not afford a major war financially or militarily. Yet Adams also understood the danger of appearing weak. If the United States did nothing, both France and other nations might see the country as an easy target. Adams also knew that domestic politics would complicate every step he took. Federalists demanded a strong response. Democratic Republicans accused Adams of being too friendly toward Britain. His cabinet was divided, with several members more loyal to Alexander Hamilton than to Adams himself. Many of Hamilton's supporters wanted war with France and hoped to use the crisis to build a powerful military. The pressure was intense, but Adams believed his duty was to protect the nation, not to satisfy the desires of political factions. His challenge would be to respond firmly to French aggression while keeping the country out of war. This required patience, careful timing, and a willingness to endure criticism. By the end of Washington's presidency and the beginning of Adams, the threat of war hung over the country like a dark cloud. American ships were being taken at sea. Diplomats were being rejected. Congress was frustrated. Merchants demanded action. Newspapers encouraged the public to prepare for the worst. The United States was a small nation surrounded by powerful empires. It did not have the resources to fight a prolonged war. Its economy depended on trade with both Britain and France. Choosing one side could damage commerce with the other. At the same time, refusing to choose could anger both. This was the complicated world Adams stepped into. Tensions were rising, and the nation faced pressure from all sides. The French government believed the United States would eventually return to its old alliance. Many Americans believed France needed to be confronted. Few people saw a peaceful path forward. Yet Adams did. He understood that the nation's survival depended on avoiding unnecessary wars. He believed diplomacy could still succeed if given enough time. He believed the United States could defend its rights without sacrificing its independence. These beliefs shaped every decision he made during the crisis. By the time John Adams entered office in March 1797, the relationship between the United States and France had deteriorated to a point that made conflict seem likely. American ships were being seized, diplomats were being rejected, and trade was in danger. Adams understood that he needed to take action quickly. His first instinct was to try diplomacy. He believed that misunderstandings and anger on both sides had made the situation worse than it needed to be. He hoped that if American representatives met directly with French officials, they could talk through the problems and restore peace. This hope led to one of the most important events of Adams's presidency. It would be remembered as the XYZ Affair, a diplomatic incident that shocked the nation and pushed the United States even closer to war. Adams selected 3 respected American diplomats to travel to Paris. They were Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, John Marshall, and Elbridge Gerry. Each man brought a different set of strengths. Pinckney had military experience and had lived in Europe for many years. Marshall was a skilled lawyer with a calm temperament. Gerry had a long background in politics and believed strongly in negotiation. Their goal was simple: convince the French government to stop seizing American ships and reopen peaceful relations. Yet even before they arrived, problems began. The French government, now under the Directory, refused to meet with Pinckney. They claimed that sending him as a diplomat was an insult because they believed he was too friendly with Britain. When Marshall and Gerry arrived, they hoped the government would change its attitude, but the situation only grew more tense. The American envoys were not brought directly to senior French officials. Instead, they were approached by intermediaries who claimed to speak for powerful members of the French government. These intermediaries made demands that shocked the Americans. They insisted that the United States pay a large loan to France. They also demanded personal payments for French officials before any serious negotiations could begin. This type of demand was common in parts of Europe during the 18th century, but the Americans believed it was unfair and insulting. The United States was a new country, and its leaders were determined to show that they would not buy respect. The envoys refused to pay. The French representatives hinted that refusal would lead to more seizures of American ships. They implied that the United States needed to recognize its weakness and treat France with greater respect. The Americans saw these demands as bribery. They recorded each conversation with care, knowing that they might need to explain their actions later. The negotiations went nowhere. The envoys tried to keep the conversation open, but the French intermediaries repeated the same demands. Eventually, the Americans decided that no progress could be made. Marshall and Pinckney left France. Gerry stayed behind in the belief that he might still find a peaceful way forward. His decision later created controversy at home. When the envoys sent their reports to Adams, he faced a difficult choice. He could keep the matter quiet and continue trying to negotiate, or he could release the details and risk inflaming public anger. For weeks, Adams tried to be patient. He did not want to damage the chances of peace by publicly accusing France of improper behavior, but members of Congress demanded answers. Some suspected that Adams was hiding information to protect France. Others believed that releasing the documents would justify a stronger military response. Adams finally sent a complete set of the envoys' correspondence to Congress, but he replaced the names of the French intermediaries with the letters X, Y, and Z. This was done to avoid identifying individuals who might not have acted with full government approval. That decision led to the popular name of the event. The XYZ Affair became headline news across the country. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Americans were furious when they learned that French representatives had demanded bribes simply to begin negotiations. Newspapers published every detail. Public meetings were held to denounce France. Merchants demanded protection. Ministers preached sermons condemning foreign arrogance. The phrase "million for defense, not 1 cent for tribute" became a rallying cry across the country. Federalists used the scandal to prove their long-standing claim that France could not be trusted. They argued that only a strong military response could protect American honor. Democratic Republicans were placed on the defensive. They had long supported France and viewed it as a partner in the fight for liberty. Many of them found it difficult to explain the French demands. Some suggested that Adams was exaggerating the situation for political purposes. These arguments did little to change public opinion. Most Americans believed the envoy's reports and felt insulted by France's behavior. The effect of the XYZ affair on American politics cannot be overstated. It deepened the divisions between Federalists and Democratic Republicans. It also encouraged a surge of nationalism. People who had never taken a strong interest in foreign affairs now felt personally involved in the crisis. The idea that a foreign country would try to bully the United States touched a nerve in many citizens. Federalists pushed for a larger military. They argued that France understood only force. They wanted new taxes to pay for ships, artillery, and soldiers. Some called for the country to prepare for a full-scale war. Alexander Hamilton, in particular, encouraged a strong response. He believed war with France would strengthen the federal government, weaken the Democratic Republicans, and allow the United States to assert itself on the world stage. Democratic Republicans worried that a military buildup would threaten civil liberties. They feared that an expanded army might be used for political purposes. They pointed out that the envoys had been treated poorly, but they insisted that peace was still possible. They believed France's behavior was a result of confusion, not a deliberate insult. The disagreement grew sharper as Congress debated new laws. The Alien and Sedition Acts, passed in 1798, were partly a response to the fear of French agents and domestic unrest. These laws allowed the government to deport foreign nationals and punish critics of federal policy. Federalists saw them as necessary during a time of crisis. Democratic Republicans viewed them as a threat to free speech. Although Adams signed the acts, he rarely used their powers, a decision that later showed his preference for restraint even in times of tension. While the United States did not declare war, the XYZ affair pushed the two nations into a state known as the Quasi-War. It was an undeclared conflict fought mostly at sea between 1798 and 1800. American ships were authorized to defend themselves and capture French vessels engaged in hostile actions. The Navy grew rapidly. New frigates, including the famous USS Constitution, began to patrol the Atlantic. American naval forces performed well. They captured several French ships and protected merchant vessels. British warships, who were fighting France in a separate conflict, also helped defend American trade. Although the United States did not formally join Britain, the two nations cooperated at sea. This cooperation made France believe that the United States was aligning itself more closely with its old enemy. Despite the clashes at sea, Adams did not allow the conflict to escalate into a full war. He resisted calls for a larger army. He prevented Hamilton from gaining control over military decisions. He reminded Congress that the goal was to defend American interests, not launch a campaign across the Atlantic. His leadership during the Quasi-War showed a careful balance between strength and restraint. The XYZ affair placed Adams in a difficult position. The public was angry. His own party was pushing for war. Yet he believed that with time, France might realize that a peaceful relationship with the United States was in its best interest. He understood that France was unstable. The government was weak and faced challenges from within its own borders. Adams believed that sooner or later, a different group of leaders in France might be more willing to negotiate. Adams spoke to Congress in clear terms. He outlined the French demands, but did not use the moment to inflame emotions. He emphasized the importance of national honor, while keeping the door open for future diplomacy. He reminded Americans that a strong defense was necessary, but that war should be avoided whenever possible. His speeches were measured and thoughtful, even when the national mood was heated. This calm approach helped prevent the country from sliding into an emotional rush toward conflict. It also demonstrated Adams's belief that a president should put the country's long-term interests above temporary political advantage. Many Federalists criticized him for being too cautious, but Adams firmly believed that rushing into war would weaken the United States and divide the nation even further. In the immediate aftermath of the XYZ affair, it appeared that the United States and France were headed toward a major conflict. Yet the event had deeper consequences that later helped Adams find a path to peace. The crisis convinced the French government that the United States would defend itself. It also showed that the Americans were willing to strengthen their navy to protect their commerce. This display of resolve, combined with ongoing political struggles in France, made French leaders reconsider their approach. Within a short period, The government that had mishandled the negotiations was replaced. A new leader, Napoleon Bonaparte, emerged with ambitions that focused on Europe rather than North America. Napoleon saw little benefit in fighting the United States. These developments created the opening that Adams later used to negotiate a peaceful settlement. The XYZ Affair is often remembered as a moment of insult and anger, but it also served as a turning point. It clarified American expectations. It reminded Europe that the United States was young but determined. It also reinforced the importance of diplomacy backed by strength, a lesson that would guide American foreign policy for years. After the XYZ Affair became public, the United States entered a tense period often called the Quasi-War. It was not a declared war, but hostilities took place at sea, and the nation prepared for the possibility of a wider conflict. John Adams faced intense pressure from all sides. The public was angry. Many members of Congress demanded action. Leading Federalists wanted a larger army and closer ties with Britain. Democratic Republicans warned that military expansion would lead to dangerous central power. Adams had to navigate these pressures while keeping the country from crossing the line into open warfare. This period reveals how Adams used strength as a tool for peace rather than for aggression. His approach was careful and deliberate. He understood that a weak defense could invite French hostility, but excessive preparation could trap the country in a war it did not need. By strengthening the Navy, reorganizing the military, and supporting internal security measures without fully embracing the most extreme proposals, Adams managed to calm public fears and send a clear signal to France. At the same time, he kept the nation free from war that could have caused lasting damage. 1. Strengthening the Navy. One of Adams's earliest moves was to strengthen the United States Navy. Before this crisis, the Navy was small and only partly developed. Several ships had been built during George Washington's presidency, but funding had been inconsistent. Some vessels that were started had never been completed. Adams believed the Navy was the most practical and reliable way to protect American interests. Ships could defend merchant vessels, respond quickly to threats, and avoid the large expense of maintaining a standing land army. The public supported naval expansion. Coastal merchants, in particular, wanted protection for their trade routes. American ships had been seized by the French for years, and many business owners were losing money. Adams and Congress responded by approving funds for new ships, completing unfinished frigates, and hiring experienced officers. Among the officers chosen were men who later became well-known, such as Thomas Truxtun, who played a major role in early naval victories. The Navy's actions had an important psychological effect. American sailors began to capture French privateers that had been disrupting trade. These victories were widely reported in newspapers. They helped restore the nation's confidence after the shock of the XYZ Affair. They also showed France that the United States could defend itself without resorting to large-scale war. Each captured ship was a reminder that aggression came with consequences. While the Navy gained strength, Adams resisted efforts to build large numbers of new ships beyond what was necessary. He wanted a capable force, not an oversized fleet that would burden the federal budget. His moderation, though disliked by some Federalists, kept the nation's finances stable during a volatile time. 2. Debates over the Army. While most Americans supported the Navy, expanding the Army became a far more divisive issue. Federalists argued that France could try to invade to the Caribbean or attack American ports. They believed a large land force was necessary to prepare for the worst. Democratic Republicans warned that an expanded army could be used for political purposes. They feared it might be led by officers loyal to the Federalist Party rather than to the nation as a whole. Alexander Hamilton became a central figure in this debate. As the Inspector General of the new Provisional Army, he wanted a large and permanent force. Hamilton believed that France was dangerous, but he also saw political value in a strong army. Adams recognized the risks in giving Hamilton too much influence. He knew Hamilton was ambitious and feared he might misuse military power. Because of these concerns, Adams blocked many of Hamilton's proposals for additional troops. This decision caused friction within the Federalist Party. Many leading Federalists believed Adams was ignoring the seriousness of the French threat. They accused him of being weak or indecisive. Adams, however, was steady in his judgment. He believed the United States needed enough soldiers to protect its borders and defend against sabotage, but not so many that the balance of civil authority would be threatened. The army that was eventually formed was smaller than Hamilton wanted, but large enough to reassure the public. It was also never deployed in a major conflict. Adams's moderation kept the army from becoming a political weapon, and it prevented the United States from appearing overly aggressive toward France. 3. Inland defense and national unity. As tension grew, Adams also took steps to strengthen the country's internal defenses. He encouraged the building of coastal fortifications and supported efforts to improve communication between military posts. He understood that the United States was still a young nation with limited infrastructure. Any conflict with European power would strain resources and expose weaknesses. Adams believed that unity at home was just as important as strength abroad. He urged Congress to support measures that would give citizens confidence in the government's ability to protect them. But he also warned against reactionary policies that could divide the nation. His position reflected his larger foreign policy philosophy. He believed that the United States was safer when its people trusted their leaders and understood the goals of national defense. This balance can be seen in the way he dealt with domestic political disputes. While he supported laws designed to strengthen internal security, such as the Alien and Sedition Acts, he did not use them to their full extent. He signed the laws because he believed they would help prevent foreign interference, but he avoided widespread arrests. In practice, the government used the Sedition Act mainly against newspaper editors who criticized Federalist policies. This troubled many Americans, including some within Adams's own party. Adams later admitted that these laws had caused more harm than good. By using the laws sparingly, Adams kept the crisis from turning into a crisis of civil liberties. He allowed the courts to handle disputes and avoided direct involvement in prosecutions. This restraint helped maintain a measure of public trust during a tense period. 4. The Navy's role in the Quasi-War. As the Navy expanded and became more active, the Quasi-War unfolded in scattered engagements across the Atlantic. American ships patrolled trade routes, escorted merchant vessels, and chased down privateers. Although the conflict did not involve massive fleets or major battles, it was important in shaping the young nation's reputation. American captains proved their skill in several key engagements. The frigate USS Constellation won 2 celebrated victories against French ships. These successes were hailed in newspapers, and they helped boost national pride. The Navy also disrupted French efforts to attack American commerce. Each captured French ship weakened the enemy's ability to threaten American interests. These naval actions served 2 major purposes. They protected the national economy, which depended on maritime trade. They also demonstrated to France that the United States was serious about its defense. This combination of protection and controlled force reinforced Adams's diplomatic strategy. He wanted France to understand that the United States was calm, steady, and prepared to defend itself, but not eager for war. The Quasi-War also encouraged improvements in naval technology and training. Officers gained valuable experience. Shipyards increased their production skills. These developments gave the United States a stronger military foundation that would later play a role in the War of 1812. 5. Calming public opinion. Public opinion during the Quasi-War played a major role in shaping the government's actions. Many Americans feared that the conflict might expand into a full war. People remembered the sacrifices made during the Revolution and wanted to avoid another long and costly struggle. Others believed that France had insulted the United States and deserved a strong response. Adams had to steer between these views. He recognized the danger of letting public emotion lead the country into war. He maintained open communication with Congress and issued public statements that explained his decisions clearly. His messages emphasized patience, preparation, and the hope for a peaceful resolution. He reminded the public that a strong defense was a safeguard, not an invitation to war. Newspapers played a powerful role in shaping public opinion. Many Federalist papers encouraged aggressive action, while Democratic-Republican papers criticized the administration. The fight between these newspapers sometimes made it seem as if the country was more divided than it actually was. Adams stayed above the press battles. He believed that a president's role was to lead by steady action, not emotional rhetoric. In speeches to Congress and in private letters, Adams repeated a central idea. The United States must be ready to defend its rights, but war should always be the last option. Over time, many Americans came to accept this view. They supported defense while hoping for peace. This shift in public mood allowed Adams to continue his diplomatic efforts. 6. Preparing for peace through strength. What made Adams's approach successful was the way he combined strength with restraint. The Navy was strong enough to stop French aggression. The Army was organized enough to protect the country without becoming a force capable of starting unnecessary conflict. Internal security measures reassured the public without overwhelming civil liberties. These actions created a position of stability that allowed diplomacy to work. Adams believed that peace was more likely if the United States showed discipline. He rejected the idea that shouting threats would make the country safer. Instead, he relied on steady preparation. He believed that a successful foreign policy required calm decision, making even during moments of crisis. By the end of 1798, the United States was better defended than it had been at any time since independence. French ships were being held in check. American merchants began to feel more secure. Tension remained, but the country was no longer in a state of panic. This shift in national mood gave Adams room to take the next major step in avoiding war, which involved reopening the path to negotiation. Despite the rising tensions of the Quasi-War, John Adams remained committed to finding a peaceful resolution with France. He understood that the United States could not afford a full-scale conflict. War would have drained the country's finances, strained its limited military resources, and deepened the political divisions that were already threatening to destabilize the government. Adams knew that diplomacy required patience and careful planning. While some members of his own party, particularly Alexander Hamilton and his allies, pushed for an aggressive approach that could have led directly to war, Adams consistently prioritized measured, strategic efforts that would protect American interests without sacrificing peace. Adams's approach was shaped by his deep knowledge of European politics. Having spent years as a diplomat in France and the Netherlands during the American Revolution, he understood how internal conflicts within a government could affect its foreign policy decisions. He recognized that the French Directory, while powerful on paper, was politically fragile and susceptible to influence from changing factions. Adams knew that the aggressive behavior shown during the XYZ Affair and the Quasi-War was partly the result of internal instability, and that a display of steady American resolve combined with patient negotiation might produce results without bloodshed. He also understood that timing was critical. Pushing too hard could provoke war, while delaying for too long could embolden France further. In 1799, Adams took the initiative to reopen the channels of communication with France. He sent a diplomatic mission to Paris with the goal of negotiating an end to hostilities and restoring trade relations. These new envoys were well chosen for their skills, reputations, and experience in international diplomacy. Unlike the earlier mission that ended in the XYZ Affair, these diplomats were carefully instructed to maintain flexibility, avoid confrontation, and explore creative solutions that could satisfy both nations. Adams understood that the Americans needed to demonstrate both firmness and willingness to negotiate. They were to insist on respect for American sovereignty while avoiding demands that France might perceive as threats to its honor. The French government, now facing its own internal crises and led by a more pragmatic leadership, was increasingly willing to consider negotiation. Napoleon Bonaparte had begun to rise as a key figure, and the French were interested in consolidating power in Europe rather than continuing a distant conflict in the Atlantic. They recognized that continuing the Quasi-War was costly, disruptive, and potentially damaging to their own trade interests. France's readiness to negotiate gave Adams the opportunity he had been waiting for, and he pursued it carefully, aware that a misstep could reignite hostilities. Throughout the negotiations, Adams maintained a delicate balance between demonstrating strength and extending the olive branch. He did not immediately end the Quasi-War or withdraw the Navy from patrols, which signaled to France that the United States could defend itself and would not tolerate further aggression. At the same time, he consistently emphasized the possibility of peace through negotiation, creating an incentive for France to engage seriously in dialogue. Adams also resisted pressures from his cabinet and from congressional leaders who demanded immediate and aggressive military responses, recognizing that rash decisions would jeopardize the possibility of a lasting settlement. The result of these diplomatic maneuvers was a convention of 1800, also known as the Treaty of Mortefontaine. This agreement formally ended hostilities between the United States and France and restored peace and trade relations. It represented a major achievement for Adams and a validation of his strategy of combining careful preparation with persistent negotiation. The treaty also resolved the lingering issues arising from the Treaty of Alliance of 1778, clarifying that the United States would not be obligated to participate in European conflicts, while France agreed to respect American neutrality and refrain from seizing American ships. The success of the convention owed much to Adams's patient and strategic handling of the crisis, as well as his ability to resist domestic pressures to escalate military action unnecessarily. Adams's diplomatic achievements were particularly remarkable given the intense political environment at home. Federalists, who controlled much of Congress and the press, were often impatient with Adams's cautious approach. They wanted a strong military confrontation with France that they believed would enhance national honor and strengthen the Federalist Party's political dominance. Adams's refusal to fully embrace the strategy caused friction within his own party, and some critics accused him of being indecisive or even sympathetic to France. At the same time, Democratic Republicans viewed Adams's handling of the crisis with suspicion, as they had long supported France and questioned whether his naval expansion and military preparations were designed to provoke conflict. By skillfully navigating these domestic pressures, Adams demonstrated remarkable political courage, choosing the long-term stability of the country over short-term partisan advantage. One of the key lessons of Adams's diplomatic approach was his understanding of the interplay between military readiness and negotiation. By building a credible naval force and maintaining an organized army, he provided the United States with the leverage needed to negotiate from a position of strength. The French were aware that further aggression could provoke effective retaliation, which encouraged them to engage constructively in talks. At the same time, Adams's commitment to avoiding full-scale war signaled to both France and the American public that the ultimate goal was peace, not conquest. This dual approach of demonstrating capability while offering negotiation created a climate in which compromise became the most rational option for all parties involved. Adams's persistence also reflected his broader vision for American foreign policy. He believed that the United States, as a young nation, should avoid entanglements in European conflicts whenever possible. He saw neutrality not as a passive stance, but as a proactive strategy that allowed the United States to protect its sovereignty, promote commerce, and grow stronger domestically. At the same time, he understood that neutrality required active defense measures. Without the Quasi-War's naval patrols and organized army, France might have continued aggressive seizures of American shipping, weakening the economy and undermining national authority. Adams's strategy demonstrated that the path to peace often requires the careful exercise of power as a tool to enforce respect without resorting to open conflict. The Convention of 1800 had broader implications beyond the immediate resolution of the crisis. By successfully avoiding a war with France, Adams preserved the financial stability of the United States, prevented a deepening of political divisions, and protected the young nation's international reputation. The treaty also reinforced the principle that the United States could assert its rights while remaining independent of the European powers' conflicts. Adams's handling of the situation provided a model of leadership that emphasized prudence, strategic planning, and the long-term interests of the nation over temporary public sentiment or partisan pressure. In the aftermath of convention, the Quasi-War gradually came to an end. American ships returned to standard commercial duties, and naval forces were gradually reduced to peacetime levels. While some political leaders continue to criticize Adams for not pursuing a more aggressive course, history has judged his actions as a defining example of successful diplomacy. By resisting the pressures for immediate war, maintaining a credible defense, and pursuing sustained negotiation, Adams ensured that the United States avoided the significant costs of European conflict at a critical stage in its development. His leadership preserved the nation's independence, reinforced its sovereignty, and demonstrated the value of thoughtful, measured foreign policy. The resolution of the crisis also allowed the United States to continue developing its domestic institutions without the disruption of a full-scale war. Adams's approach reinforced the importance of maintaining a balanced federal government capable of responding to both domestic and international challenges. By combining diplomacy with military preparedness, he strengthened the credibility of the presidency as a source of both leadership and restraint. The lessons of this period would influence future American foreign policy, establishing a precedent for combining strength and negotiation rather than relying solely on force or rhetoric. Adams's success in avoiding war with France highlighted the importance of patience, persistence, and strategic judgment in leadership. The XYZ Affair had inflamed public anger and raised fears of open conflict, yet Adams recognized that these emotions did not have to dictate policy. Through careful diplomacy, targeted military preparation, and resistance to partisan pressures, he demonstrated that a leader could protect national interests while avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. His actions underscored the value of measured responses, the importance of understanding international dynamics, and the need to prioritize the long-term stability of the nation over immediate gratification or political gain. The diplomatic maneuvers and peace efforts orchestrated by Adams served as a turning point in American foreign relations. The Convention of 1800 not only ended hostilities with France, but also reinforced the principles of neutrality, sovereignty, and careful strategic planning that would guide the United States in the decades to come. Adams's approach exemplified the power of leadership, grounded in prudence, patience, and an unwavering commitment to the nation's long-term interests. By successfully navigating one of the most dangerous foreign policy crises of his presidency, he ensured that the United States remained free from war while maintaining its honor and international credibility. The foreign crisis with France placed John Adams in an extraordinarily difficult position domestically. While he worked to navigate the United States away from war, he faced intense political pressure from both Federalists and Democratic Republicans. Each faction had its own expectations, and Adams had to satisfy neither fully if he wanted to preserve the nation's stability. The intensity of the political environment during this period makes Adams's restraint all the more remarkable, revealing his commitment to principles and his ability to prioritize the long-term interests of the country over partisan gain. From the moment the XYZ affair became public opinion was inflamed. Americans were angry at the French for demanding bribes and humiliating the country's diplomats. Newspapers published sensationalized accounts, and public meetings erupted in protest. Federalists demanded immediate retaliation, arguing that France had disrespected the United States and could only be taught a lesson through military force. Many citizens and leaders alike viewed war as inevitable. Democratic Republicans, on the other hand, cautioned against overreaction, pointing out that France was politically unstable and that a hasty war could damage American interests and strengthen Britain. These divisions were mirrored in Congress, which was sharply split between those pushing for military escalation and those advocating restraint and continued negotiation. Within his own administration, Adams faced considerable challenges. Some of his cabinet members and close political allies strongly supported Hamilton's position, which called for aggressive action against France. Hamilton and his followers argued that a strong war posture would not only defend American honor, but also strengthen the Federalist Party politically. They believed that showing weakness could embolden France and invite further challenges. Hamilton even proposed measures to increase the size of the army far beyond what Adams considered necessary, and he sought influence over key military appointments that would allow him to control strategic decisions. Adams, aware of Hamilton's ambitions and potential dangers of granting him unchecked power, carefully blocked many of these proposals. He understood that ceding control could lead to unnecessary war and potentially undermine civilian authority over the military. By resisting Hamilton's push for immediate conflict, Adams risked criticism from within his party, yet he remained steadfast in his belief that the nation's long-term security mattered more than short-term political advantage. Adams also contended with Democratic Republicans who were skeptical of his intentions. Many viewed his naval buildup and army preparations as evidence that he was favoring Federalist interests or seeking war unnecessarily. They accused him of overreacting to the XYZ affair and of using the Quasi-War as an opportunity to expand federal power. This criticism placed Adams in a position where every action he took could be questioned, and he had to carefully balance military preparedness with the appearance of impartiality. He maintained transparency in his communications with Congress and the public, explaining the necessity of defensive measures while emphasizing that the goal was peace. This careful messaging helped to mitigate opposition and gradually built support for his overall strategy. The broader public also played a powerful role in shaping Adams's domestic challenges. Many Americans were deeply invested in the crisis, feeling that their national honor had been insulted by France. Merchants whose trade had been disrupted were vocal about the need for protection. Citizens along the eastern seaboard, whose livelihoods depended on maritime commerce, were particularly anxious. Public sentiment, driven by fear and outrage, created intense pressure on Adams to act quickly and decisively. Despite this, Adams consistently resisted calls for rash retaliation. He recognized that reacting impulsively to public anger could lead to a full-scale war that the United States was not prepared to fight. Instead, he used measured communication to keep the public informed and reassured, stressing that preparation, discipline, and patience were the most effective means of defending national interests. One of the most significant domestic pressures Adams faced involved the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. These laws, passed by a Federalist-controlled Congress, allowed the government to detain or deport foreigners considered dangerous and to prosecute individuals who spoke against the government. While Adams signed these acts into law, he exercised restraint in their enforcement. He avoided using them as tools to suppress dissent widely, recognizing that heavy-handed application could further divide the country and damage civil liberties. By doing so, Adams demonstrated his commitment to the principles of governance even under pressure. He understood that maintaining public trust and domestic stability was essential to navigating foreign crises effectively. The divisions within American politics during this period were not just about policy, but also about ideology. Federalists believed that a strong central government and a proactive military were necessary to preserve order and protect the nation's interests. Democratic Republicans, conversely, feared centralization and valued restraint, advocating for a focus on diplomacy and commerce. Adams, positioned between these extremes, had to carefully navigate competing visions of the United States. He drew on his experience and judgment to balance these conflicting pressures, recognizing that the consequences of choosing sides too aggressively could be severe. His decisions reflected a commitment to the broader national interest rather than partisan gain, a principle that was central to his approach to foreign policy. The Quasi-War itself intensified political divisions, making Adams's role even more challenging. While naval engagements occurred primarily at sea, the perception of imminent conflict affected every aspect of American political life. Congress debated appropriations, military appointments, and the organization of defenses with heightened intensity. Partisan newspapers amplified arguments, portraying Adams either as a cautious leader preserving peace or as a weak president failing to defend American honor. Adams navigated these debates by adhering to his principles. He strengthened the Navy and organized a defensive army while resisting pressures to escalate hostilities. By doing so, he demonstrated that political leadership required both courage and restraint, especially in times of national crisis. The outcome of Adams's handling of domestic pressure was significant. His careful balancing act allowed the United States to maintain internal stability while preparing for a possible conflict abroad. He preserved the authority of the presidency by showing that decisions would be guided by national interest rather than party politics. By exercising restraint in both the military and political arenas, he prevented the escalation of domestic tensions into a crisis that could have weakened the country during a critical period. His ability to manage competing pressures at home directly contributed to the eventual peaceful resolution with France, showing that skillful domestic leadership is as crucial as foreign diplomacy in preventing war. Adams's domestic strategy was rooted in the principle that leadership often requires making unpopular choices for the greater good. He accepted criticism from all sides, knowing that protecting the nation's long-term stability sometimes meant resisting the immediate desires of both the public and powerful political factions. By combining careful management of the military, prudent enforcement of domestic laws, and steady communication with Congress and the public, Adams maintained a level of control and coherence that allowed diplomacy to succeed abroad. His handling of domestic challenges demonstrates that the avoidance of war is not solely a matter of international negotiation. It also depends on effective political leadership, management of public sentiment, and a steady commitment to national priorities above partisan interests. The experience of managing political pressures during the crisis with France also left a lasting legacy. Adams's approach established an example of presidential leadership grounded in principle rather than expediency. He showed that even in the face of widespread public outrage and intense partisan division, it is possible to act decisively yet cautiously, defending the nation's interests without rushing into destructive conflict. The lessons from this period influenced future leaders, reinforcing the idea that successful governance requires both vision and patience, and that domestic cohesion is essential for effective foreign policy. By maintaining the delicate balance between opposing factions, Adams preserved the United States' capacity to navigate international crises, reinforcing the idea that internal political stability is inseparable from a nation's ability to avoid war. The resolution of the crisis with France marked a defining moment in John Adams's presidency. By the end of 1800, the United States had successfully avoided a full-scale war with one of the most powerful nations of the time, while maintaining its sovereignty, protecting its commerce, and strengthening its international reputation. The process leading to this outcome was gradual, deliberate, and often frustrating. It involved patient diplomacy, careful management of military readiness, and steady leadership in the face of domestic and international pressures. The story of this resolution illustrates the complexity of leadership and the importance of balancing multiple priorities when the stakes are high. Adams's approach to resolution was rooted in his consistent belief that diplomacy should be pursued until all peaceful avenues were exhausted. While the Quasi-War raged on at sea, he never lost sight of the ultimate goal, avoiding unnecessary bloodshed and ensuring the long-term security of a nation. He understood that the Navy and Army he had strengthened were not simply instruments of defense. They were tools that provided leverage in negotiation. France, observing the capability and readiness of the United States, recognized that continued aggression would be costly and potentially counterproductive. This perception created a window for Adams to pursue diplomatic channels with greater confidence, knowing that the United States would not appear weak or indecisive. The Convention of 1800, also referred to as the Treaty of Mortefontaine, was a formal instrument that ended hostilities and restored peace between the United States and France. Negotiated over several months, the treaty addressed multiple issues that had caused tension. It reaffirmed the United States' neutral position in European conflicts, confirmed French respect for American shipping and commerce, and resolved lingering obligations from the 1778 Treaty of Alliance. By clarifying these points, the treaty removed many uncertainties that had fueled earlier confrontations. It also demonstrated that careful negotiation, grounded in both principle and practicality, could produce results even under highly charged circumstances. The treaty's negotiation required skillful diplomacy on both sides. American envoys were instructed to insist on respect for sovereignty while remaining flexible on technical details that would facilitate agreement. Adams carefully monitored the process, providing guidance without micromanaging, allowing his diplomats to adapt to the shifting situation in Paris. The French, facing their own domestic challenges and the rising influence of Napoleon Bonaparte, were increasingly willing to compromise. They recognized that a prolonged conflict with the United States offered little strategic advantage and could distract from pressing matters in Europe. The convergence of these circumstances, combined with Adams's patient and strategic leadership, made the successful resolution possible. One of the most significant aspects of the resolution was that it preserved the independence of the United States. By avoiding a formal war, Adams ensured that the nation would not become entangled in European power struggles. This outcome aligned with his long-standing principle of neutrality and reinforced the idea that the United States could assert its rights without being drawn into foreign conflicts. The treaty also established a precedent for resolving international disputes through negotiation supported by credible defense, a principle that would guide American foreign policy for generations. The domestic impact of the resolution was equally important. By avoiding war, Adams prevented the economic and social disruption that a major conflict would have caused. The United States was still a young nation with limited resources, and a prolonged war with France could have strained the economy, drained the treasury, and threatened the stability of the federal government. Merchants could continue trading with reduced risk of seizure. Coastal communities could feel safer, and the population could focus on domestic development rather than preparing for widespread conflict. In this sense, the treaty provided both immediate relief and long-term security. Adams's handling of the resolution also had profound political consequences. His careful navigation of domestic pressures during the crisis demonstrated the importance of principled leadership. Despite facing criticism from both Federalists, who wanted a more aggressive response, and Democratic Republicans, who distrusted his military preparations, Adams maintained a steady course that prioritized the national interest. By resisting partisan demands, he preserved the credibility of the presidency and reinforced the idea that leadership sometimes requires taking unpopular positions for the sake of stability and peace. The aftermath of the resolution also influenced the structure and development of American military forces. The Quasi-War had highlighted the need for a capable Navy and a well-organized Army capable of responding to threats. The experience gained during this period informed future decisions about military organization, strategy, and funding. Officers who had distinguished themselves during the Quasi-War became part of a professional cadre that would serve the United States in subsequent conflicts. The careful expansion and management of the military during Adams's presidency demonstrated that preparedness and restraint could coexist, and that military power could be a tool to prevent rather than provoke war. Adams's foreign policy success also had an impact on American international standing. By resolving the crisis with France peacefully while maintaining national honor, the United States earned respect from other nations. European powers observed that the young country could defend its interests, negotiate effectively, and exercise independent judgment. This perception helped secure a position of credibility for the United States in future diplomatic interactions, demonstrating that even a nation still developing its institutions could act strategically and assertively on the world stage. The personal cost to Adams, however, was significant. His decisions during this period were not always popular, and they contributed to political tensions that would affect his later career. Many Federalists criticized him for resisting immediate war, viewing his caution as a lack of resolve. Democratic Republicans remained wary of his intentions, interpreting his military preparations as evidence of hidden motives. The strain of navigating these pressures, while simultaneously managing a complex international crisis, tested Adams's resilience and judgment. Despite these challenges, he remained committed to his principles, showing a willingness to endure criticism for the sake of the nation's stability and long-term interests. The resolution also provided an opportunity to reflect on the lessons of leadership in crisis. Adams demonstrated that successful conflict management requires a combination of strategic vision, careful preparation, and patience. He balanced the need to demonstrate strength with the necessity of avoiding unnecessary escalation. His actions highlighted the importance of maintaining domestic stability while engaging in international diplomacy, recognizing that public sentiment, partisan politics, and military readiness all play critical roles in shaping outcomes. By integrating these elements into a coherent strategy, Adams achieved a result that protected the United States without sacrificing principle. In addition to its immediate practical effects, the resolution influenced American political culture. It reinforced the idea that the United States could navigate international challenges independently, without relying excessively on alliances or foreign powers. It also demonstrated that the federal government could exercise authority in ways that balanced defense, diplomacy, and civil liberties. Adams's leadership during this period provided a model for future presidents, illustrating how careful, principled action can prevent conflict even under conditions of intense pressure and uncertainty. The successful resolution of the crisis with France marked one of the most important achievements of Adams's presidency. By avoiding war, preserving American sovereignty, strengthening military capabilities, and navigating domestic political pressures, he secured a period of stability and set a precedent for measured, strategic leadership in foreign affairs. The Convention of 1800 and its aftermath underscored the value of combining negotiation with credible preparedness, showing that the avoidance of conflict often depends as much on restraint and wisdom as on power. Adams's actions ensured that the United States emerged from the crisis intact, respected, and prepared for the challenges of the new century. The long-term significance of this resolution extended beyond the immediate period. It helped solidify the principle that the United States would not become embroiled in the frequent wars of Europe, a concept that would influence American foreign policy well into the 19th century. It also reinforced the importance of a balanced approach to military and diplomatic strategy, emphasizing that credible defense and patient negotiation can work together to protect national interests. Adams's leadership during this critical moment demonstrated that the avoidance of war is often as important as victory in battle, and that the principles guiding decisions in times of crisis can shape the nation's future for decades to come. The period of tension with France and John Adams's handling of the Quasi-War left a profound mark on the young United States, both in terms of foreign policy and political leadership. Adams's decisions during this crisis reveal a number of lessons about leadership, diplomacy, and the delicate balance between principle and pragmatism. His approach demonstrates how a nation can protect its interests, maintain sovereignty, and uphold its values, even when faced with pressure from powerful foreign nations and intense domestic opposition. One of the most important lessons from Adams's handling of the crisis is the value of restraint in leadership. Many Americans, inflamed by the XYZ Affair, clamor for war. Federalist leaders in Congress and the press argue for immediate military action, believing that force would restore national honor and secure commercial interests. Adams, however, understood that a hasty declaration of war could have disastrous consequences. The United States, still a young nation, lacked the financial resources and military strength for a prolonged conflict. By carefully assessing the risks and resisting calls for aggression, Adams demonstrated that true leadership requires patience and foresight. He showed that courage is not always measured by the willingness to fight, but by the ability to avoid unnecessary conflict while maintaining national security. Another key lesson is the importance of balancing military readiness with diplomacy. Adams did not ignore the need to defend the nation. He expanded the Navy, organized the Army, and ensured that coastal defenses were strengthened. These measures created a credible deterrent that allowed the United States to negotiate from a position of strength. At the same time, he pursued diplomacy tirelessly, reopening channels of communication with France and guiding the negotiations that led to the Convention of 1800. By combining preparation with negotiation, Adams illustrated that defense and diplomacy are not mutually exclusive, but complementary tools for achieving national objectives. Adams's handling of domestic political pressure also offers valuable insights. He faced criticism from Federalists, who accused him of weakness, and Democratic Republicans, who feared that his policies favored the elite or leaned toward unnecessary conflict. Despite this, he remained committed to his principles, prioritizing the long-term stability of the nation over short-term popularity. His ability to navigate partisan divisions while maintaining a coherent strategy demonstrates the importance of steady leadership in a polarized environment. It shows that leaders often must endure criticism from all sides to act in the best interests of their country. The crisis and its resolution also highlight the significance of strategic communication. Adams consistently communicated the rationale behind his decisions to Congress and the public. He explained why defensive measures were necessary, why diplomacy should be pursued, and why restraint was the wisest course. This transparent approach helped manage public opinion, build trust in the government, and reduce the likelihood of panic or rash action. Adams understood that leadership extends beyond decision-making. It also involves guiding the perceptions and expectations of citizens to maintain unity and confidence during challenging times. Adams's handling of the Quasi-War had lasting implications for American foreign policy. By avoiding war with France, he set a precedent for neutrality and independence in international affairs. He demonstrated that the United States could assert its rights without becoming entangled in European conflicts, a principle that would influence the nation's approach to foreign relations for decades. This approach reinforced the idea that small or young nations could use a combination of preparedness, negotiation, and strategic patience to defend their interests effectively. The legacy of Adams's actions also extends to the development of American institutions. The experience of building and managing the Navy, organizing the Army, and coordinating defenses provided practical lessons in military planning and administration. Officers who gained experience during the Quasi-War contributed to professionalization of the United States military. These developments strengthened the nation's capacity to respond to future threats and underscored the importance of maintaining a balanced and capable military as a foundation for both defense and diplomacy. Furthermore, Adams's leadership during this period underscored the role of principle in governance. He consistently prioritized the nation's long-term stability over political advantage or immediate satisfaction. By resisting pressure from party leaders and public opinion, he demonstrated that principled leadership often requires making difficult, unpopular choices. This aspect of his legacy serves as a reminder that the responsibilities of leadership extend beyond managing crises. They also involve safeguarding the integrity of institutions, protecting the nation's values, and guiding citizens through uncertainty. Adams's success in avoiding war also had important economic consequences. By preventing a full-scale conflict with France, he allowed commerce to continue with less disruption, preserving the nation's growing economy. Merchants and traders benefited from a degree of stability, and the young republic avoided the financial burdens that accompany major wars. This outcome highlights the interconnectedness of foreign policy, military preparedness, and economic stability. It illustrates that strategic decisions in one area can have far-reaching impacts on the nation's overall well-being. The resolution of the crisis also reinforced the importance of measured diplomacy and negotiation as tools for conflict resolution. Adams demonstrated that even in situations of intense national emotion and international tension, careful dialogue can achieve outcomes that are beneficial for all parties involved. The Convention of 1800 exemplified how negotiation, when supported by credible defense and grounded in a clear understanding of national interests, can produce durable agreements. This lesson remains relevant for leaders in all contexts, showing that skillful negotiation is often as critical as military capability in maintaining peace. The period of tension with France shaped the historical assessment of Adams's presidency. While he faced criticism during his lifetime, subsequent evaluations have highlighted his courage, foresight, and dedication to principle. By prioritizing peace over partisan gain, strength over recklessness, and negotiation over immediate retaliation, Adams demonstrated leadership qualities that continue to be studied and admired. His ability to guide the nation through one of its earliest foreign policy crises, while balancing domestic pressures and safeguarding national interests, stands as a testament to the enduring value of principled, strategic governance. The lessons and legacy of John Adams's handling of the crisis with France are multifaceted. They emphasize the importance of restraint, the integration of military preparedness with diplomacy, the management of domestic political pressures, and the role of principled decision-making and leadership. They illustrate how effective communication, strategic planning, and careful negotiation can prevent war and protect national interests. Adams's actions during this period established enduring precedents for American foreign policy, strengthened national institutions, and provide a model of leadership that balances courage, prudence, and commitment to long-term goals. The legacy of this period demonstrates that the avoidance of war, when achieved through skillful and principled action, can be a significant achievement as victory in battle, leaving a lasting impact on a nation's trajectory and identity. John Adams's presidency faced one of the first major foreign policy crises for the young United States, and his handling of tensions with France remains a defining example of leadership under pressure. The XYZ Affair and the subsequent Quasi-War created a climate of fear, anger, and division. Citizens demanded swift action. Federalist leaders pushed for aggressive military measures, and Democratic Republicans warned against overreaction. Amid these competing pressures, Adams maintained a steady focus on the nation's long-term security, demonstrating a rare combination of courage, patience, and pragmatism. Rather than being swayed by emotion or partisan ambition, he prioritized the avoidance of unnecessary war while ensuring that the United States could defend its interests effectively. Adams's approach relied on a careful balance between military preparedness and diplomatic negotiation. By strengthening the Navy, organizing the Army, and improving coastal defenses, he created a credible deterrent that made France aware that further aggression would be costly. At the same time, he opened channels of communication and directed skillful diplomatic missions to Paris, ultimately leading to the Convention of 1800, which formally ended hostilities and restored peaceful relations. This combination of firmness and restraint demonstrated that military strength and diplomacy could work hand in hand, allowing the United States to achieve its objectives without the devastating costs of full-scale war. The president also had to navigate intense domestic pressures. He faced criticism from Federalists who demanded immediate retaliation and from Democratic Republicans who feared unnecessary centralization of power. Adams's careful management of public opinion, his principled enforcement of domestic laws, and his transparent communication with Congress allowed him to maintain both domestic stability and political credibility. By resisting partisan extremes and acting decisively yet cautiously, He reinforced the authority of the presidency and underscored the importance of principled leadership in times of crisis. The resolution of the crisis with France had lasting consequences for the United States. It preserved the nation's independence, strengthened its military and diplomatic institutions, and enhanced its international reputation. It established a precedent for resolving disputes through negotiation supported by credible defense, demonstrating that a young nation could assert its rights and protect its interests without becoming entangled in foreign wars. Economically, it safeguarded trade and commerce, preventing the disruptions that a full-scale war would have caused. Politically, it highlighted the value of moderation, foresight, and restraint in guiding a polarized nation through international challenges. John Adams's leadership during this period exemplifies the principles of careful judgment, strategic patience, and unwavering commitment to national interest. By avoiding war with France, he secured the young nation's stability and set an example of diplomacy grounded in strength and prudence. His actions remind us that true leadership is often measured not by the battles fought, but by the conflicts wisely avoided, and that the preservation of peace can be the most significant achievement of all.